Welcome to the Liberation Lab podcast, insights and interviews for the disruptive educator. I am honored to have my sis on. I'm going to let her introduce herself. So, why don't you tell the people who you are, what you do, and why you do it?
Peace, everybody. I am Miss Marianna. I am a social wellness practitioner. I operate in the home, school, neighborhood, and workplace, giving mental health tools, emotional hygiene practices, and overall social wellness lifestyle education for all ages. Yeah.
So, um, I love the terminology there of emotional hygiene. And full disclosure, you blessed my school by coming out and doing all the things that you do. And you talked about just being emotionally funky
Yeah.
and things like that. Talk to us a little bit about the funk that can happen if we're not practicing emotional
We
hygiene. Kind of
want the
take folks through
funk.
that.
Hey, get off that funk. I get funky sometimes. We all get funky. I think that's probably one of the biggest personal and professional issues that we deal with when we're talking about our social wellness. It's easy to talk about mental health because when we talk about our mind, we sometimes detach that from our heart. And to me, it's amazing how so mental health has become trending so much. But I'm like, hey, that couples directly with our emotions and our emotional hygiene, right? So when we talk about hygiene, we talk about physical hygiene. People know exactly what we're talking about. It's our personal responsibility to purge and to cleanse ourselves of what we come in contact with, right? Physically, we can be the cleanest person, but you go outside, you interact, you work out, you do chores, just free radicals floating in the air sticks to our skin, gets in our nostrils, gets on our taste buds, right? The toxins in the environment and our food. So I like to use that as the analogy oftentimes when we're talking about emotional hygiene, because a lot of us get sedity. And when we're in denial that we're funky when it comes to our emotions, that's when the mental health, it's hard to do the work mentally when we don't understand that that is connected to our emotions. So emotional hygiene is the phrase that I have been using for quite some time. And, people giggle about it, but it does allow us to quickly ground ourselves because the same way we all have to do our physical hygiene, we are all responsible for our emotional hygiene. And that works well when I'm talking to young kids, elementary students, high school, college students, and grown folks who think we are always so fresh and so clean. And we're not, including myself. I got to clean that. I got to clean that art out sometimes.
Yeah, yeah. I love the self awareness of that. I find that there are generally two responses that I see more often than not when it comes to this emotional hygiene. One is, well, I'm not really an emotional person,
Yeah.
or folks that are, will kind of shun that side of things or look at emotions as weak or whatever have you. And then I also have this other camp where either they're justifying their emotional funk or they feel like their emotional funk is everyone else's responsibility. Like they need somebody else to clean them. Does
Yes.
that make sense what I'm trying to say there?
Absolutely. I think no matter where we are on the spectrum, right? So there are some of us who think we are funk free. Some of us kind of, I would say, kind of wade in our funk and make that a part of our identity to get maybe some emotional reactions from people that would get people to be more responsible. All I'm saying is pull out the funkometer wherever you feel like it, no matter how you justify it. The bottom line is just like when we're infants, we're helpless. And there are times when it is someone else's responsibility to purge and cleanse us. But as we become adults, young adults, if we are blessed and fortunate to have adults around us to pour into us the skill sets and the tools necessary to purge ourselves, we are then responsible. I think when we're talking about people who may be experiencing denial, and I've been there before, right? And if I don't check myself and do my work, I can be there tomorrow, right? But I think what happens is people who justify making everyone else responsible for purging them is usually those are the people that actually just need help and don't know how to access it. Most of the time, when we don't have a ramp or access to garner whatever skill sets we need to take care of ourselves, we go outward and we blame everybody. And I think a lot of the times we won't have to justify behavior. We don't have to blame everybody. What it is I don't know how to do it. And if I don't know how to do it, we do what babies do. We have a tantrum. You seen the stinky baby with the saggy diaper before, right? Creating funk for everybody because they're funky, they're uncomfortable, they got an attitude, right? There's a lot of older adults running around with soiled emotional pampers on, blaming everyone else because maybe they didn't have someone teach them the skill sets to purge themselves, or they didn't listen to the individuals that they did have in their lives. But it's ultimately a level of discomfort. And usually, what I find is just not knowing how to remedy that issue, not knowing how to decompress those emotions, to purge, to cleanse, and just to get the reset necessary to then make the mental adjustments.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's to that point, a emotionally dysregulated adult cannot help regulate a child. It is almost, I would say in my experience, the adults who, whether it's a trigger point where they feel disrespected or they feel neglected or whatever the thing is, it comes up for them first. They fail to recognize it, then the kid responds to what was said, how it was said. They feel disrespected. So they're the only thing that they have is the weapon of their words. So they're going to try to do, and have these interactions. And I say all of that to say, what does it look like for us as adults to have a greater awareness of our emotions, our emotional hygiene before we begin to ask students to have emotional maturity and grow in areas that we ourselves are not practicing or modeling?
Learning how to apologize. I think most adults, I think most guardians, I think most parents, somewhere along the line of becoming this expert at parenting, at teaching, we fail to acknowledge when we fall short, when our temper was short, when our tolerance, when our patience, when we're just being human. We would much rather go a punitive approach and well up in our authority, right? And point out what a child did as the reason why we acted away, instead of simply modeling, you know what? My energy was off. And I'm not being accountable for that right now. I either stonewalled you and cut my energy off, and children, just because they might not be able to articulate that note, all humans know what it means and feels like to be stonewalled. What's wrong with you? Nothing. What's wrong with you? Nothing. Finally, it comes out after maybe having, a crack in the frame that allows, it to burst out. And so I think, and my own personal experiences working with my own daughter, but then also working with other young people, like being able to check myself in real time before denying it was probably the best thing that I could ever do. Now, whether or not somebody's willing to forgive you and move forward past that, but acknowledging the emotional funk in real time. And then not only acknowledging it, hey, I didn't sleep good last night. I have my own drama going on at home. I didn't have bandwidth and I handled you really short, or I cut you off, or I didn't give you energy at all. And I need to apologize for that, because that's not the character that I want to, represent. And that's truly not who I am. And I need to ask for your forgiveness. And I just want to make it clear that I was wrong. And I think sometimes teachers are so in the energetic posturing of checking off, red marks on people's paper and correcting young people for a living, that they forget that they can also stand corrected. And that teaches a young adult or a child more social skills than, lighten them up every time that they're, need to punish them, is really showing them like, I'm capable of making a mistake. I'm capable of, being in error, but I'm also capable of making that wrong right, acknowledging it, and then extending the social skill set for you to see that I can do what I'm asking of you on a daily basis.
Hmm.
So I think just, parents and educators learning how to check themselves, because students and children don't often have the authority to check you. And oftentimes they'll be creative and they'll just act a fool. And then you can, as the adult, deflect on them acting a fool instead of being responsible for the funk that you brought to the situation.
I think that is, I mean, nail on the head there, because I think about it even I tell on myself for those who are listening. I started teaching in Camden, New Jersey. For those who listen, they know I tell the story. But when I started teaching, I graduated teacher prep programs, realized I didn't know how to teach, and they hand you books and things, and the book that they handed me was a lot of high control methods. You
Mhm.
had to watch where students' hands were. Did they have a pencil in their hand within 30 seconds of coming into the classroom? Were they in their seats? And so I was
Right.
very high control, very high policing black bodies without igniting a black mind. And so when that began to happen, what I found was I got away with a lot because I looked like my students. And outside of those moments, we had rapport, but I was doing a lot of harm.
Mm.
And because I was doing a lot of harm, the way that the system is set up is because I was producing certain results, because students were improving in their scores, it would appear that I was being a great educator. And it wasn't until I began to really look at the damage that was being done to these babies as a result of me choosing to interact with them in this way that I began to see, wait a minute, does it have to be at the expense of their humanity that I begin to do these things to them? Like, why can't learning and joy and all of these things coexist? And then I started to realize I'm funky.
Mhm.
It's me.
We okay.
That's it. That's it. And to your point, I had to apologize.
Yeah.
Like, I had to turn, and thankfully I'm still in connection with so many of them. But every time I get a chance to talk to them and connect with them and see where they are now in their lives and things like that, I'm like, man, I am so sorry for how that all went
I
down.
was tripping. You was tripping. But you know, that's the thing. Like we can't if we are to the point where we can acknowledge a school to prison pipeline, when we are at the point where we can acknowledge the founding institutions that created our educational systems, just like the Popo wasn't created to protect and serve. They were there to protect and serve a group, certain groups of people's property. And at one point, melanated people were the property. So we always have to look at the origin in which something is created. And I think the misstep and the mistake that oftentimes educators of African descent, indigenous educators do is we know that the system is screwed up, but we go to that system to educate us and to give us permission to educate children. And we fail to think that, like, maybe some of the ideology and the theories, like you said, are having me come into this authoritative control perspective where I'm policing. And if you're policing somebody, at some point you're going to criminalize somebody. And a lot of the times, yes, we producing the scores because we want to produce, right? And that's what you want your property to do is produce a certain crop to be a better employee down the line. But the reality is when we're talking about this, we have to sit back and say, hey, I was educated by the very institution that didn't see me as a human being at some point in time in its inception. So I have to look at if I'm going to talk about the school to prison pipeline, and if I'm going to talk about the origins of the educational system, especially here in the Western world, I have to go through and do my purging, do my emotional hygiene, and see what assimilation and what things that I've picked up along the way that I think just because I have brown skin and I have the ability to connect culturally, but maybe they weren't producing good grades because we were really cultivating them. Maybe we were punking them and they were scared to get bad grades. And so all they learned how to do was regurgitate information. But there was no true engagement. There was no soul led connection in the process. And I think that that's what a lot of us educators, whether we're in the system or out of the system, are really begin to pay attention to. And just us being here in this moment is what allows us to take accountability for some of the funk that we picked up from those who educated us and gave us permission to be in the educational system.
And the educational system, the way that it's set up, for those who are listening, it is not going to solve a problem that it benefits from, right?
Mm,
Like, if I continue to have this assembly line that I call education and I try to churn out teachers that do the same things over and over again, like, there is no place in the world where you will go. Let's say it's a restaurant and they yielded failing results over and over again, year after year. They harmed people are walking away sick from the restaurant and people aren't going to say, close that down, let's investigate what's happening.
yeah,
Right, at some point, if it's one or two fish in the stream that are dying, you look at the fish. But if
yeah.
it's the whole family school of fish that's dying, sometimes you got to look at the water. What is
Yes.
happening in the environment? What are the root causes of what's happening here? And we fail to do that year after year. And then educators kind of get this, you know, free pass to continuously do harm. And I don't think any educator goes into the system and thinks, I'm going to perpetuate harm. I think they
Yeah.
go into it very much so like, love the kids. I want to help. I want to do this thing. And
Mm-hmm.
then they get socialized, they get educated into, they have to conform to a system that is set up to continuously churn out the same results year
Yeah.
after year after year.
Yeah.
Which brings me to something I want to cue up for you, right? So we've talked about the funk, but now if I'm somebody that's listening, what does emotional hygiene even begin to look like? How do I get myself clean? What is that?
Yeah.
How can I even start that process?
Well, it's interesting because a lot of what we are doing in terms of taking care of our mental health has been trending for the last 10, 15 years, right? Like, hey, we're now aware of this aspect of our total being. But I think one of the things that is missing is not just the emotional hygiene, but also too is looking at ourselves as whole beings and understanding that a lot of what we engage in terms of getting our education, whether we're getting it, whether we're giving it, is one thing that's missing is soul, the soul, right? And especially when you look at Black folks, indigenous people, that's the thing that they love, the soul food, the soul dance, the soul art, right? That's the pizzazz that connects us with that flow, with that deep essence of purpose and passion. And I think a lot of people, when it's time to do the cleanup job, they want to just work with the cerebral. If they're lucky, they maybe work with me and other people and start working with the heart. But that other element is the soul. And so to answer
Mhm.
your question, like, hey, when I need to purge and when I need to cleanse, okay, I might have anxiety, I might have depression, all these clinical words. But where am I afflicted in my soul? Where do I not feel whole in myself? Where do I feel disconnected from? Where am I feeling purposeless or invisible? Where am I not shining for myself? Because that will give us directives to an area where it's deeply connected to our mind and to our heart. And so I think sometimes if you can't get to it through the cerebral, if you can't get through it to the emotions, like you said, there are some people that I'm not emotional like that. I'm very logical, right? That oftentimes I've had people, even people, clients who I've had session with or groups, they're stone faced, or then you have the people that are crying all the time. Sometimes that's not the entry point that I want to take is the mental and emotional, but I could hit you in that soul. When I start speaking the truth of my soul and what I've had to do, and I'm not talking, don't get weird on me. I'm not talking about, religion, right? When I say soul, I mean our energy, AKA our energy. Where am I lackluster in my energy? Where am I lackadaisical? Where do I feel that disconnect? If we follow that arrow, right? It's a lot easier for us to start looking at, okay, what moments do I do feel that spark? Is it when I'm in nature? Is it when I'm in sports and being physical? Those are the places that usually if we go there, we go through the entry point of what feels our energy, what feels our soul. We're a lot less defensive and we're a lot less likely to justify what we mentally are in denial of or emotionally in denial of. And that's what I've had to bring into the teaching and then the self exploration and self awareness experiences is I might not always be able to get somebody on the same page intellectually or emotionally. But if I can get to that spark, which is usually what makes people feel comfortable and at ease, that everything else opens up. And that's just the opposite of what we do in institutional educational environments. It's always cerebral. If we're lucky, we get a little SEL, but because there's so much division in thinking that it has to be about religion. No, what does the energy feel like? And that's why these little kids are gravitating to meditation. Everybody thought, oh, kids won't be still. I see all the little videos with little kindergartners, woo style. They love it. That's why, when you do have the certain types of maybe Montessori or, style schools where their hands are in the earth, or they're able to participate in the arts and they're able to participate in sports where their body is connected with a high energy force field, they're a lot likely to not have behavioral quote unquote issues. They're a lot likely to be able to be open minded and open hearted to whatever else it is we want to pour into them. So I would say
Mhm.
for someone who is looking like, how do I purge myself? First, get your energy right. Go to the environments or do the activities that open you up, that lift your energy, so that when you're ready to do that mental and emotional work, you have the energy to fortify you. So you're not trying to fight and you're willing to go with the flow and explore without that blockage. That's what I would say to a person. And then the other thing I would say, and this is just going to be plugging my book, get my workbook on your shit, right? The acronym for SHIT is some healing in there. And it's only a 50-page workbook, and it helps people go through some of the basic stops necessary. And then by the time they get through looking at maybe any trauma they've had, the reactions, you can do that self-assessment. So it's not a doctor or your boo thing or your relatives telling you. You get to do your own self-assessment in your little private tent. And then by that time, you can get prompted to whatever modalities or professionals that can help you do the continuum of that purging. Yeah.
When you came and you gave the books, and then I had the extra one because nobody wanted to, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm about to do it. One of my teachers asked me for it, so I gave it to him. So I got to go back to your website
I
and get
got
one.
you. Okay, good. You're happy.
So for those who are going to do that, that'll be in the show notes. Make sure you go down to the show notes, you click that link, and you go ahead and you purchase that workbook.
Thank you. Thank
Uh,
you.
the it's interesting to hear the piece about knowledge of self and knowing your energy and what fuels you and all of that, because in education we typically we're told, about child psychology, we're told about developmental theory, we're told about Maslow before Bloom, and all of these different things that we are taught ingrained in us. So we come into the profession with almost, I'm going to use the analogy of a PhD in how do I see everybody else, but fail to get a GED, if you will, in ourselves.
You better drop them bars.
And so here we are in a very people driven, humanistic, like there's a human element, a very human element to education, and we miss it all because we don't know ourselves. We
Yes.
don't look in the mirror, right? And here's the thing, like it's similar to, those close knit, those tight relationships you have with whether it be a friend or your significant other, partner, whatever you have. Like if I'm 10% wrong and you 90% wrong in my mind,
Mm.
I don't want to apologize for my 10. You better apologize for your 90
You're more wrong
before
than me.
right. Right. And so then it becomes this measuring contest of who's more wrong, who's going to admit it, right, and all these different things,
Yeah.
because I won't own my own stuff, right? I won't free myself. I won't own my own shit. You hear what I'm talking about?
Well, that's interesting because I find most educational institutions to be extremely judgmental. Extremely judgmental.
Talk about it.
Extremely judgmental. You have what it already exists is the educational hierarchy, where I'm going to say this loud and clear. I have worked with young kids, young brothers and sisters from the hood, and I've worked all the way in corporate spaces and foundations with millionaires all around the world. And you know what? The people with the most education are the most judgmental and have the lowest confidence,
Wow, wow. Wow, wow.
have the most imposter syndrome. And while they're suffering with it on their selves on the inside and projecting how they have it all together, everybody's judging each other because their makeup was created in an environment based on judgment. So you got an 82% and you got a 97%. Oh, you got your master's degree before me. And that's what I mean. Like there's these levels that we're trying to obtain. Again, school to prison pipeline. Who's the warden? Who's your master? Who's your daddy, right? Who's going to play the best, right? And so there's so many different elements and layers. And this is not to be confused with dissing the power of higher education. But I think when
Mhm.
we're working with institutions, again, at one point in time that wasn't created for us or by us in Western worlds, right? When my mother taught me a long time ago, I can't remember what tribe or what specific group, but in Africa, when they start seeing that baby playing with the pen, they put him with the scribes and they go do a rites of passage and they start working with them. If the baby's picking up the tools and the building block, if the baby's weaving, now I'm not saying this is all African cultures, but the idea is having a holistic experience based on that child's interest, not on this competition, not on this judgment, not how right or wrong you are in this percentile. A holistic experience is what builds confidence. And so I
Hmm.
see people going up through these ranks, working through these judgments of themselves, of judgments of others based on how well they achieved this accolade. And then they may even mess around and create a great career and make lots of money, but they're not connected on a soul level to what they do. They're actually
Hmm.
a lot of people suffering and feeling the opposite. And so I just feel like when we're looking at educational institutions, we have to look beyond some of the more traditional routes and start looking holistically at what fits this child. My mother knew at a young age I was a performance artist. She found we was broken in the hood. She found every community center, every theater project. I could model, lip singing, talent contests. Then she found a center for creative expression, which at the time it was like Fame. I don't know, if you remember the show Fame back in the day,
Hmm.
but it
Hmm.
was a center for the arts. She understood the power of putting me in an environment where I can thrive. Now, as I elevated into other schools and they started taking certain programs out, I didn't do so well. I didn't do as well. So to me, it makes more sense to not put a child in an environment and lash them with whip them with the lash, tell them, I'm going to judge you. You're a bad student if you're not excelling this way, instead of finding what best suits and fits this child's needs. Where is their soul connected? And once they find that soul connection, they feel confident, they feel empowered, and then that carries over to other subjects and environments that maybe isn't their favorite, or they don't see as much value in it, but they have value in themselves and they're more receptive to learning other things in other environments.
Hmm. Hmm. And when we are willing to do that type of work, and that soul connection, it becomes so much easier for us to connect things that maybe they don't typically gravitate to the things that they're interested in.
Yeah,
Countless
absolutely.
conversations I've had with the young people I get to serve about how math is involved in things like basketball,
Hmm.
right? They're like, no, and I'm like, oh my gosh, if I shoot the ball like this and I go straight up and down, that's not the right trajectory. That's a math term. Let's
You
talk
see him
about it,
hit that
right?
360 and dunk on him.
Right, right. And these are all the things that they are connected to in their soul, but they might not necessarily have all
Yes,
the prerequisite understandings of it up
right.
here, right? And that's the connection we get to make. That gives them life and joy in the learning versus us saying, man, if you don't know how to do these 25 problems in under a minute, your intelligence is going to be rated this way,
Yeah, that's so
right?
dry, so boring.
I saw a clip art actually of it was an elephant, a fish, there was a chimpanzee, and I think it was a snake. And they said, "We're going to measure you by how well you climb that tree."
Perfect, perfect.
And I look at that and I'm like, that's schooling in a nutshell.
Yeah,
Because we're all going to ask you to do this thing that may not be where your genius lies. But if you take a fish out of water and you throw him on the ground, you're not going to see it's going to look pretty dumb,
yeah,
quote unquote. It's going to look like it's not functioning in all of its genius because you took it out of the environment where its genius can thrive. And then you
absolutely.
take that thing and you put it back in the water. Hold on, wait a minute. How, I didn't know you could move like that, or I didn't know that you could operate in this environment. Well, sometimes we got to put our babies in the environment whereby which they can thrive so their genius can come out, because now they can connect to these other things and their soul connects to the learning, and we're doing these different things. So now, with that being said, people are going to hear that and be like, man, that's a pipe dream, because at the end of the day, I got to wake up and I still got to go back to the school who may not have a school leader who's trying to connect with folks like Miss Mariana and have her come out and talk to and do her thing so people can get connected to self and all of that. They not may not be there. Shameless plug, invited to your school. So I want to ask then, with that being the ideal, how do we connect folks to these little pictures of this soul connection, these little pictures, if you will, of this emotional wellness and hygiene while we're operating in spaces that may not support it all the way? How can we do this in ways that may be more realistic for the listener who's hearing and maybe cynical, if you will?
Yeah. Well, for the person who might hear that and say, oh, that's just a pipe dream, every time you say that's a pipe dream, also say you're contributing to the school to prison pipeline. That would be the first thing I say. Because what you're saying is you are a hopeless individual, that you are rendering yourself powerless, and that you are not nurturing your creativity with the level of education and somewhat authority that you have to bring programming into the classroom. And I hear a lot of people say, oh, well, I got to get past the STAR testing and the required testing and all this and that. I can do an enrichment activity that lasts 10 minutes that can change a young person's mind, that can open a young person's heart, that can help them connect to their soul. If we're really going to think that we have children in our classrooms for more hours than a parent has with their adult on a day to day out of a 7-day week, you got this young adult from 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. till 3 o'clock every single day, and you can't be creative and find the spark. The reason why you say you love children, which means you're there because you want to be a part of their human growth and development, and you can't squeeze in a culmination of 30 minutes in a week, whether that's 5 minutes every day, 7.5 minutes every day, to do something that sparks their creativity, their passion, their joy. No wonder why they don't like you as a teacher. You're not exciting. You're not passionate. You're not a joy to be around. You're concerned about producing grades. You're concerned about a quota. And if you can't be creative like countless generations of some of the most amazing teachers, especially like in HBCUs, right? Who, yes, I got to get this content to you, but I'm also going to slide in that Tupac verse. I'm also going to slide in that Shakespeare and some of the creative wordplay. I'm going to actually throw up the lyrics of some of the lyrics to some of your songs. And let's look at those were the small activities that some of the greatest teachers did for me. And it didn't take every day of the week, right? That teacher that put up what's the picture with the clock melting over the tree, and what's your interpretation of
Yeah.
this? I don't remember what that artist is, but we all, us in from the 80s and the early 90s, we remember that. Those created thoughts, critical thinking, conversations. We don't need to wait to just get to college to get to those specialty classes to do that. And so I would say to that educator that is concerned about the school to prison pipeline, but also feel like it's a pipe dream to bring your passion back in the class, don't just go for the continued education to keep your degree on point. Continue to put yourself in learning environments as an educator. What I notice is that as soon as people become teachers and get that degree, they think they're done learning. You should be going to as many workshops and facilitations in the communities. You should be going to festivals where you can learn about your different students' cultures and bring it back so they get excited that you know about it and ask them to speak on it. That takes 5 or 10 minutes. That you can do a pizza party once a month, and you can't do that. You can't show an excerpt of a play or do a science project, even if you're not a science teacher, to show the cycle of life and purpose. These are things that contribute to human growth and development, that have life lessons that most of the kids, by the time they get to high school and college, are mad that we didn't teach them.
Hmm. Hmm.
They're very frustrated with us.
There's actually, it's funny you say that. There's actually a case pending because a young lady went through and matriculated an entire school system, graduated with honors. She got to college based off of that, and she can't read or write at the level at which she should be able to.
She get $1 million.
Yeah.
Look, let me get
Yeah.
in on that. Let me find out how I can get a piece of that.
Make that a class action suit. You know what I'm talking
Let's
about?
join in. But I can't. I was born in '79. I came at the tail end of when, vocational education was on point. I'm at the tail end of it, but that gave confidence. So even if it wasn't this, pipe dream and this soul certified lesson, right? Just having them have a vocation and having that within the school system. Get brothers was carpenters, sisters could sew, photography, all of these different vocations within the school system. It allowed them a level of confidence and the ability to take care of their livelihood. And that created a lot more, fulfilled human beings that had some sort of purpose. And you have the choice to pick that. It usually started off as like a elective, right? But then once you dabbled in it, it's like, okay, now you can join the full program. Carpenters, welding, mechanics. So those are just a few. So I think that it doesn't always, if it's not cerebral, if it's not emotional, if it's not soul led, then vocational. That to me sounds like a holistic educational experience.
Yeah.
And that was
Yeah.
what would be fair. That's what would produce less angry, disconnected, unsatisfied young people that are just like that woman, matriculating through these processes and ain't got two pennies to rub together, no self esteem, no confidence, and then expected to pay 3 times the rent to
for
live every
something that
day.
may not. That's it. That's it. I want to ask one more question, and then as we round out our time, uh, here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking about um, the young man that you had an opportunity to connect with in a recent video that I saw, who he never or he had rarely got the opportunity to share where he was hurting from and why he acted out in the class, and he shared about his dad and things that were really going on in a real way. And here's what thought to myself, and you actually put it on your videos. What if we had more educators like this, right? But my thought in that is you created a space whereby which, and it wasn't perfect. What I mean is there were other students who were not prepared for that moment of vulnerability that you actually had to like turn and clue them in on it and make it safe and call out certain things and say, nope, this is what this moment is. And we're going to do this now. We're going to celebrate his vulnerability. We're going to rally around him. That takes a level of skill. It takes a level of understanding, knowledge of self. But more times than not, we exist in spaces where it's not safe enough to tell somebody else where it hurts. The work to begin that for sure is knowledge of self, for sure it's emotional hygiene. But I would love if you could just share kind of just a capsulating thought for us, a takeaway, something that we could do right after, we end this podcast and we go into our schools, our places, we finish running on the treadmill, wherever we might be in this moment. What is something that they could actualize as a result of this conversation? And then secondarily to that, please, how can folks get in touch with you and connect with you and support you?
Wonderful. So I just want to make sure the premise for a fair representation of that young man, he wasn't acting out at all. He was a very quiet young man and very
Thank you.
observant.
I apologize.
Yeah,
Yep.
no problem. Most people assume, right, like because somebody's going through trauma, they're acting a fool. But, on the contrary, there are a lot of students that withdraw and they're very quiet. So
Yes.
he did participate in other activities. But what happened is I allowed them a self assessment opportunity and to kind of cue in on how judgmental, right, a lot of our educational experiences are, our students often withdraw. One of the things that I do that's foundational in all learning, exploration, and enrichment experiences, again, no matter where I'm working with somebody who is in elementary school, middle school, high school, college, educators, staff, whoever, I always carve out an opportunity for self assessment. And in that particular activity, and I want to make it very clear that reel was only about 4 minutes. So just to really, show that this is not something that I had to take out. That little snippet was only 3 to 4 minutes. But what happened is I gave the opportunity to do these assessments, mental and emotional assessments of themselves, not me diagnosing them, prescribing them, shaming them, telling them what they should or shouldn't do. What happened is some volunteers spoke up. And then, I asked, is there anybody else that wants to share? And okay, we were going to close and transition to their break. And he actually was like, no, I want to do it too. So I have to commend him because he could have let that moment fly by. And that young man had an opportunity to do a self assessment. And all he was simply doing was sharing his self assessment. He saw his peers do it. He didn't want to miss the opportunity. And he shared, and he ended up being a model example of what it's like to not just be
Yeah.
vulnerable, because we have to be careful about saying vulnerable. When we really look at the definition, it means I'm unsafe, I'm unarmed. What it is I'm not trying to necessarily get people to be vulnerable. I'm just trying to get people to be open, because you can open to the degree that you feel safe, not just let it all hang out and hope that there isn't somebody in the room taking the opportunity to harm you. He opened himself up. And then, like
That's
you
good.
said, I was able to simultaneously, which I think a lot of the times people, I make it look so easy, but I am doing 2, 3 different things. I'm locked in with this person doing a semi session. Then I'm having to turn and hold his attention, then talk to his homeboy, then talk to the students, and they're all giggly smurfs at this age, right? So any one thing blows in the
Absolutely.
wrong direction. And I have to
Yeah.
be able to be firm, but not controlling. And so I would say, to educators, wherever you are listening, to parents, wherever you are listening. Allow your youth an opportunity to do a self-assessment before you judge them, before you grade them, before you correct them. Give them the opportunity to recognize what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and where that may be, what experience that may be rooted in. They are very self-aware. We simply don't give them as much opportunities as they need to do the self-assessment, and then we can simply assist them when it's time for them to go through the self-expression process. And that's really all I'm doing. I don't go in there reading the kids and telling them, right? Well, I might get a little sassy with them and they love it too, because they feel connected to, I go beyond being a teacher and I become an auntie. So I would say to you, educators, allow your students to assess themselves, because that's how we start to diminish the guilt, the shame, and the embarrassment. And then everybody can look at each other and say, oh, we all got a little something, something that we're working on here. Now we can support each other, and we're getting back to that holistic and collective experience instead of singling people out and judging people for being at different levels on whatever spectrum and the activities that you're educating them with. So yeah, that's what I would say.
That's good. I love the vulnerability versus being open.
Yeah.
I'm taking that with me. That's
Take that,
good.
put it in your back pocket, take it with you everywhere you go.
For
Very
those who
good.
are listening and this is the first time that they are tapping into your genius and what you do, please tell folks how they can connect with you, support you, and all the good stuff.
Yes, indeed. So I am Miss Marianna. I'm a social wellness leader. When I'm in action, that shows up as a social wellness practitioner. I serve the home, school, neighborhood, and workplace. I'm available for one-on-one coaching for both personal and professional development, with some of that soul connectivity necessary for us to do some of the trauma healing, some of the inner child work, and the shadow work along the way. I also do facilitations for school environments, for institutions, for organizations, foundations who really want to offer their students, their staff, and their faculty opportunities for self-exploration to overcome any of the blockages that they have individually, which also helps them in their larger collectives to be more aware and how they can be more supportive and have overall social wellness. So you can check me out at missmarianna.today. You can also see snippets and highlights of my work online at my handles are Miss Marianna. I also have a workbook materials, the workbook Own Your SHIT, which means some healing in there. It's a 50-page interactive workbook with charts and graphs, so you can do some of those self-assessments. And then I also have a workbook, a super safety heroes workbook, which is also a children's interactive workbook to help them be safety focused and also create conversations in the family. This world is changing very fast, so safety of the body, the mind, the heart, and the soul is very important. So I am so grateful to be here. Thank you for, having a little time. As one of the little youngsters said the other day, you ain't got no problem with the brain picking. Thank you for picking my brain and allowing me to share. And for those of you listening abroad, I look forward to working in partnership with you and serving you in the years to come. Give thanks.
Well, first of all, let me just say thank y'all so much for tapping into this episode. Miss Marianna is the real deal. I've seen her in
Hey.
action. We've been connected for some time. And so if you have not had the opportunity to tap into her genius, I'm going to ask you, please go to her website. Please support her work. And in so doing, you'll see the benefits yourself. And so I want to commend that to every single person. And thank you again, my sister, for being here, for sharing space. I do appreciate you greatly.
Give thanks. Peace.